In this video, I'm going to show you how to calculate the debt service coverage ratio of a loan, or the DSCR. For context, my name is Daniel Kwache with Skyfield Finance. We partner with entrepreneurial and institutional real estate investors to help you raise capital to purchase, refinance, rehab, and develop real estate. For this example, we're going to start off with a multifamily property. So we'll assume that we have a 10-unit multifamily property. We have our monthly rents in the amount of $2,000 a month, and then we have our annual income on this property. Now, in order for us to calculate the debt service coverage ratio, we'll need to go ahead and build a pro forma. Now, in terms of building a pro forma, there are two types of pro formas you can build. You can build a pro forma from a lender's perspective, and then you can build a pro forma from an investor's perspective. For the purposes of this exercise, we're going to build a pro forma from a lender's perspective. So I've already prepared my rent roll and saved some time there. Next, I'm going to click into my pro forma tab, and I'm going to start building out my pro forma. So you'll see here, when we start building out our pro forma, we're going to have our potential gross income. Now, this is essentially going to be the income that's coming from the property. Again, for this example, we have a 10-unit, and the income from the property is $240,000. Next thing we want to do is we want to subtract our vacancy rate. Now, ideally speaking, we'd want to purchase an investment property and have that property be occupied 100% of the time. But practically speaking, you're going to have vacancies, right? You're going to have empty apartments, you're going to have tenants who are leaving, and so on and so forth. So we're going to have to back out our vacancy. We're going to set our vacancy rate at 5% of the potential gross income. And that's going to give us our vacancy rate. So you'll see here our vacancy rate is going to be $12,000 at 5% vacancy. Now, if you're underwriting a deal or you're underwriting a loan, you can underwrite it at 5%, you can underwrite it at a higher vacancy. The vacancy rate is going to depend on your local market, so you always want to reach out to your broker and understand the actual vacancy rate of your local market. But for the purposes of this exercise, we're just going to use a vacancy rate of 5%. So once we have our vacancy rate, we're going to subtract that from our potential gross income, and that's going to bring us to our effective gross income. What we'll do next is we have our effective gross income. Now we want to go ahead and subtract our annual expenses. Now, for this exercise, everything's going to be annualized. So the annual property taxes at the property is going to be $20,000. The water and sewer for this property is going to be $15,000. Now, the bulk of the deals we do is in our New York market, so we're going to use this example and underwrite it based on our experience in the New York market. Again, when you're underwriting these models, you want to go ahead and use whatever information applies to your local market. So our heating and gas for the year is going to be $12,000. Our property management fee is going to be 5% of the effective gross income. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and multiply this number by 5%, and that brings us to our property management fee. Our common area, let's say on an annual basis, the common area is going to be $3,600. Our payroll / super is going to be $2,400. Our maintenance amount is going to be $3,000. And then any legal fees associated with maintaining the property is going to be $3,000. So you'll notice here that brings our total expenses to $78,000. And in order for us to calculate our net operating income, we're going to take our effective gross income and we're going to subtract the total expenses. That's going to bring us to a net operating income of $149,000. Now, in terms of calculating the debt service coverage ratio, in order to do so, we're going to need our debt service amount. So at this stage, we have our NOI amount, so we know how this asset is performing and we know how much we have available to service the debt or service the mortgage payment. Next, what we want to do is come up with our debt service amount. Now, for this example, I've already come up with the debt service amount. Now, the way we come up with our debt service amount is we take our net operating income and then we want to go ahead and cap it. And when I say cap it, what I mean is we're going to apply our local market's cap rate. So for this example, I have a cap rate of 5%, a cap rate of 6%, and then a cap rate of 7%. Now with the net operating income of $149,000, if we cap it at 5%, that's going to bring us to a property valuation of about 2.9. If we cap it at 6%, it's going to bring us to a valuation of 2.4, and if we cap it at 7%, that's going to bring us to a valuation of 2.1. Now, I don't want to go into too much details about the cap rates and valuation just because the purpose of this video is to show you guys how to calculate the debt service coverage ratio, but we'll save this for another video. So now that we have our net operating income, we've capped it, we've arrived at a valuation of 2.9, and now that we know that the property is valued at 2.9, we can come into our amortization table and we're going to build out our financing scenarios. Now, I have a separate video as to how you build out the amortization table, and you can just go ahead and click into the channel and find that. But for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to assume a 25% down payment, which essentially means we're financing this amount, 2.2 million. And being that we're financing 2.2 million, our monthly mortgage payment or the monthly debt service is going to be $9,435.50. So this is going to be our monthly amount. Now, being that we're building out this pro forma on an annual basis, we're going to take this number and we're going to multiply it by 12. So I'm going to head back over to my pro forma, and you'll see here the debt service amount is going to be $113,225, and that's going to be that 9,000 number multiplied by 12. All right, so as mentioned earlier, the actual formula for calculating the debt service coverage ratio is going to be the net operating income divided by the debt service. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click into this debt service cell, and I'm going to take this number and divide it by my debt service. Again, I'm taking my net operating income and I'm going to divide it by my debt service. And once I've done that, you'll see here that I now have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.32. So this is how you calculate the debt service coverage ratio. Again, the formula for calculating the debt service coverage ratio is going to be the net operating income divided by the debt service. Now, why is debt service coverage ratio important? Just to kind of briefly explain the debt service coverage ratio, the debt service coverage ratio is an underwriting term. It's a term lenders use to determine how much of the net operating income is available to service the debt. So when you're getting a quote for a loan, the lender will say, hey, we want to see a minimum debt service of, let's say, 1.25, excuse me. The lender will say, we want to see a minimum debt service of 1.25. And what the lender is essentially saying is, we want to see that there is, based on the net operating income amount, there is 1.25% or 125% available to service the debt. If the debt service coverage ratio is higher, then of course the loan is going to be safer, right? Because there's more NOI available to service the debt. So in this scenario, our debt service coverage ratio was 1.32% or 1.32, and most lenders will say we want to see a minimum debt service of 1.25. So I hope you found this video helpful. Again, this is the process for calculating the debt service coverage ratio. The formula is going to be the net operating income divided by your debt service. And you want to keep that in mind as you're applying for loans. In most cases, when you're applying for a loan, the lenders will underwrite it themselves and make sure that the loan is going to satisfy their debt service coverage ratio requirement. But as an investor, it does help to have this pro forma already built out, so you already know what you're getting yourself into and you have an idea of whether or not you can qualify for this loan. Debt service coverage ratio is one of the metrics that lenders use to determine how much they're going to lend on a loan and how much risk they're willing to take on a loan. So one of the metrics is debt service coverage ratio. Another metric is LTV. And another metric is the debt yield, all of which I'll save that for another video. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did find this video helpful, I would recommend that you hit the thumbs up button and like this video. Also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. And I appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.